Now we're joined for the next 30 minutes by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, columnist for Business Week, Scripps Howard News Service, father of Reaganomics, head of policy under Ronald Reagan at the Department of Treasury, best-selling author, listed as Who's Who in America, and he joins us now. He's a top economist, and he has been breaking down here on the air the fact that this will only implode. The question is when. That we're deindustrialized. There can be no real recovery, and that Europe's melting down, the U.S. is melting down. Now this has been done, and you can either say it's by design or not. The point is, the people running things are the ones that literally engineered it. I mean, the exact same crew going back to Clinton and others. And so now there's over 1 billion as of today in the last week. Lines, bank runs in Greece, spreading to Italy. I went over those headlines in the last segment. They're all up at Infowars.com. I wanted to get Dr. Roberts on about this, but then in the second half of the interview, the police state, the re-education camp documents, the NDAA, just the insanity of what we're witnessing. What does the ruling class think they're going to do? I mean, totally wreck the country as if that's going to give them security? This is madness that's going on. So Dr. Roberts joins us. We'll also give you his website, so get a pen and paper ready for that. Dr. Roberts, what do you make of what's happening with the euro right now?
Alex, I think what's happening in Greece is the population expects Greece to be kicked out of the EU or to pull out, one or the other. And when that happens, it means the Greek currency will be devalued. It'll come back into existence, but it'll be devalued. And so it means the euro value of the new currency will be a fraction of the value of the current euros that they hold. So they're trying to get those euros now so that they don't lose their money to devaluation. I think that's what that is about. I don't think they're afraid of bank failure or the bank closing the doors. They expect that if Greece exits the EU, then it has to exit the euro. And when it does that, the new Greek currency will not be worth, they won't get an exchange rate that reflects their value of their current holding. So they're trying to get the stronger money now while they can. I think that's what's going on there. I wouldn't expect that to spread to other countries unless they also fear being ejected from the EU and losing the euro as their domestic currency. That doesn't mean there are not a lot of problems in Europe, and it doesn't mean that they have a handle on a fix.
Doc, a lot of the experts we have on pretty much agree that whether it's Max Kaiser, Bob Chapman, countless others, people like Faber, that if the euro starts unraveling, which now even Bloomberg and others are saying could happen, that it's obviously then going to have repercussions here. And they say within a few months, it's going to really show the fact that the dollar has been devalued and that's going to accelerate. I mean, what do you expect to see? Because you always make the point that because of deindustrialization, especially here in the U.S., we're technically even worse off than Europe. So why are we seeing this in Europe first?
I think because of the sovereign debt problem and because of the fact that Europe does not have a central bank that can create credit for the governments. The European Central Bank is prohibited by its charter and by the agreement that set it up between the countries from purchasing the sovereign debt of the member states. Now, it's starting to do that in these various schemes to keep Greece afloat, but it can't just simply do like the Fed and just monetize whatever debt needs to be issued. You see, the British can do that because they have their own central bank, and the bank can extend unlimited credit to the government. It can simply monetize an unlimited amount of debt, and that's what the Federal Reserve has been doing. That's what quantitative easing 1 is about, quantitative easing 2. And in my opinion, it's what they're still doing. It's how they keep the interest rates at 0 or near 0. They simply purchase all the debt that would otherwise raise the interest rates. Well, in Europe, they can't do that. The individual countries don't have central banks that can serve as creditors to the government, and the European Central Bank is restrained by charter from doing that, and they haven't loosened those handcuffs yet.
And wasn't it the Germans that demanded at the offset of the or the onset of the euro that be done because of their Weimar Republic experience with super hyperinflation and the wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread?
That's right. This was imposed by Germans as a condition for the EU. They didn't want to lose their own currency, over which they had control, and a great deal of fiscal or monetary, we'll put it, discipline. And they knew that some of the other countries, in fact, almost all the other countries, lacked that discipline. And so that was the only terms on which they agreed to become part of Europe.
But if Greece leaves, doesn't that do it anyway? So what's going to happen? I mean, the word is Greece is going to end up leaving the euro, or do you disagree with that?
I don't know whether that's the case or not. You have to keep in mind, Alex, that it's in the interest of Wall Street and the investment banks and the hedge funds to create hysteria about this, because they make huge sums speculating off the hysteria that they get the financial press to create.
And they have the inside knowledge on where it's going to go.
Well, they may or may not, but they can at least make money off with hysteria. And also, it's in Washington's interest, because if the euro is in trouble, it takes pressure off the dollar. It strengthens the dollar, because people say, oh, well, we better get into the dollar. We don't know what's going to happen to the euro. And when they go into the dollar, this also depresses gold and silver prices, which is also in Washington's interest. That also takes pressure off the dollar.
Sure.
It's like you said, and as I've said for many years, the dollar is even in worse shape, but it's not in focus. What's in focus is the euro. And so this helps Washington. And so Washington keeps this hype going as well. So, but between the interests of the investment banks and hedge funds in speculating against sovereign debt and against the euro, and between Washington's interest in having the euro in trouble because it helps the dollar, you get a lot of spin and hype, and so you can't know whether Greece is going to leave or not. It will really be a political decision. It'll be made by Germany and France primarily, and they will decide whether or not they want to reform the EU and get rid of some of the weaker elements that result in these kinds of problems, or whether they want to pay the cost of keeping Greece in. I don't think that decision has been made.
Sure. Now, that's why Merkel and the new French president, Hollande, met yesterday, and most of that they're keeping under wraps what they're planning to do. But let's expand on something. What do you make of Jamie Dimon running around and just saying, oh, $2 billion lost, that's just an accounting procedure? What do you make of the overall financial structure? What's the prognosis right now on the ongoing rotting of the world financial system?
You know, I don't think the United States financial system any longer performs a useful social function. I think it's just a deadweight cost to society, because all the American financial system does is produce a massive financial crisis that causes a huge expansion of debt and money to keep their balance sheets afloat. And this crisis was exported to Europe and is part of the trouble there. So I just don't see that there's any reason to continue to tolerate the private American financial system. It's become a great threat to the economic future of the country. It performs no useful social function. It creates fraudulent assets. The participants in these markets apparently have no integrity. You see them actually doing things that in past decades they would have been arrested and imprisoned for. So what is their function? They've taken the financial system and turned it into a gambling casino. And even they can't win. That's why you see J.P. Morgan losing $2 billion. They don't even know what they're doing. And the whole thing should just be closed down and reformed. And also, the concentration is far too extensive now. The size of these banks.
That's right. They're monopolies or duopolies, oligopolies, lecturing us about the free market all day. And they have done all this through government licensure, allowing them to do this, shutting down their competition. Stay there. I want to finish up on that point and then get into the police state you've been writing a lot about at paulcraigroberts.org. I'm Alex Jones. Former head of policy of the Department of the Treasury, Wall Street Journal editor formerly, a best-selling author. Again, paulcraigroberts.org. I'm Alex Jones of Infowars.com. But you were bringing up the lawlessness, and there's so many examples. Again, Obama launching wars. Congress says you got to come to us. That's law. I mean, it's treason if you don't. He just says, I'll do what I want. Joint Chiefs say the same thing. We've got MF Global. Billions disappear, hundreds of millions still not paid back. He gets caught lying. The head of the CME group, Duffy, won't lie for him. It's confirmed that Corzine lied. Doesn't get in trouble. I mean, this is reaching new levels. What does this signify? That they can just do anything? Why are they doing this? You worked inside the government. I mean, you know some of these people. Dr. Roberts, what is happening?
Well, Alex, I don't think that it's a plan that is unfolding by the elites. As you said, I know many of the elites. They're not as smart as I am or as you are or as many of your listeners are. And they may have some kind of plan, but it'll have far more unintended, unexpected consequences than they can imagine. And so they won't be in control, and they'll panic. And what will happen will be something totally different from any plan that they might have.
And that's what history shows with the Germans, the Romans, the Russians. These guys are megalomaniacs, so where do you see it going?
Well, I think what's happening is accountability is leaving the elites. It left government. You know, it left the government a long time ago. Abraham Lincoln got rid of accountability. You know, he even exiled a member of Congress. He put 300 newspaper editors in prison. The assault on government accountability is old, and it's gotten worse because of the war on terror, because so many people now simply assume that the government needs to be able to do extra legal things, extrajudicial things in order to deal with terrorists. And as I have said so often, where are these terrorists? How come they don't ever do anything? How come the only terrorist plots are the ones that the FBI dreams up and orchestrates? If there were terrorists, how come so many terrorist enemies walk around safe with no attempt on their lives? So, but it's propaganda that works. And so people say, oh, well, we can't make the government behave legally and constitutionally because we have this terrorist threat, and they have to deal with that. That's part of it. The other part is the elites themselves, the private sector elites. They have benefited for the last 10, 20 years from the sort of free market utopia that social perfection is the absence of regulation, and the absence of regulation means the absence of accountability. There's no, so if you're not accountable, then you behave as if you're not accountable. It changes the behavior and attitude and outlook of the elites themselves. So I think those are part of the explanation of what is going on.
Very well said. Let me ask you this question. We are seeing, and I've got contractors, I've confirmed it, but it's also in the news, they're flipping from fighting foreign Muslims to good old boys, conservatives, libertarians, people that know what's going on. And this is actually waking the police and military up. I mean, I've been having them on the show. But why is the elite getting their domestic control system really ready right now? Are they concerned about a collapse?
I don't know. I doubt it. I think they have too much hubris. I don't... You know, I'm not really on good terms with them anymore, and so I don't. They don't confide in me. But I doubt that it's that. I think what it is that it's the impetus from the bureaucracy itself. I mean, Homeland Security is what, an $80 billion institution. This is huge, and since there aren't any real terrorists to justify their existence. They've never caught a single one, have they?
No, they're just going to make us that because they can expand their mission now.
Well, I think it's to preserve the mission that, you know, the head of Homeland Security, she said this a year or two ago, that they were shifting their focus from terrorists to domestic extremists.
Stay there, Doctor. Going back to Dr. Roberts, who studied history, because I've read several of his books, he knows what he's talking about, and also obviously studied the economy as a top economist, that elites act the same throughout history. And just because they've got NSA-run Google and they've got high-powered atomic weapons and hydrogen bombs doesn't mean they're not still the same people. And they just think they can get away with all these things they're doing. And the truth is they've made themselves unaccountable. So now they're unaccountable to even sanity. And just like every other out-of-control elite does this, in every culture, they are like Kublai Khan trying to invade Japan or Hitler or Napoleon going into Russia. They are biting off more than they can chew. Because you can be the toughest guy around, but you mess with the wrong guy on the wrong day, they're going to... Or you mess with them when they got their kids with them or something, you're not going to be able to stop them. So people always think they're bulletproof and invincible, especially these people that crave power and domination. They got a screw loose. They're able to get the power because they'll cheat and steal, but then once they get it, they end up destroying themselves and a bunch of us in the process. So Dr. Roberts is making the key point here. The bureaucracy and the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about is eating our country and the rest of the world. And so you've got the bureaucracy, you've got the elites that think it's going to protect them. But just 101 in every culture, even in modern times, in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe, you always build a secret police network. It always starts spying on the parliament or the government. It always starts killing people and abusing. And a lot of times, oh, here's the new president, you know, general whoever. 6 months later, he gets overthrown. This is the last system. If I was an elite, even if I was evil and corrupt and sadistic and on a power trip, the last system I would want, Dr. Roberts, is what they're putting in. I mean, can you elaborate on that? I think that's where you're going with this, and I think that's why you make the point that you don't think the elite are driving all of this.
Unintended consequences of the elite, as well as some of the intended ones. You see, they're not just eating the country, and they're eating the Constitution. So when you eat the Constitution, you don't have any protection either. You might remember the play, A Man for All Seasons, when Sir Thomas More, the Chancellor of England, he says, so you want me to cut down the law so we can more easily chase after devils? And what will we do when the law is cut down and the devil turns on us?
Yes.
So it's what the Bolsheviks found out. That's what the Politburo found out. They were powerless in the face of Stalin. There was no longer any law. There was only the decision of the General Secretary of the Communist Party. So this is, the elites are preparing their own grave, you're right. But come back to the question of the shift from focus on terrorism to domestic extremists. this is also part of the elite agenda, because who are the domestic extremists? For example, it's environmentalists who get in the way of fracking operations, of blowing up mountains to get coal, of putting mining ventures next to national monuments and parks, of polluting waters in the Gulf of Mexico. These people are inconvenient for powerful mining timber groups. You have other people who are in opposition to Monsanto's genetically modified seeds. They're in the way. You have prophets. You have animal rights people who say animals are living creatures. They shouldn't be treated in inhumane ways in these experiments where you do all these testing, and they're in the way of the drug companies, the testing companies. So all these kinds of people are in the way. In fact, sooner or later, you and I will be in the way, because we don't speak the line. You don't speak the line, you're in the way. So they can use terrorism. That came out of 9/11. They can use the fear of that to expand it into attacks on all critics. And that's what I think Homeland Security is becoming. And you see, why else is Homeland Security stopping traffic on the interstates, or going to bus stations and train stations? There have been no incidents, not even staged FBI instances.
It's a total raw exercise of power to set the precedent.
It's getting us used to it, accepting of it. And you have to understand that the young, they don't even know the old system. They only know what they experience now. So to them, it's just normal. If you get, you just got your driver's license, you've not been driving. You're driving along the interstate, and everything's stopped, and they're inspecting you. Well, it's all you know. You grew up with it. So you don't know it's a police state. It's just what you know. You're not 40, 50 years old, and you don't remember when something like this would have been inconceivable. So I think that's what's happening to us. And another thing that's happening is, you see, I think the war on terror is wearing out for them. It's been very profitable, but they don't win the wars. You see, if you're a superpower and you have to be in Iraq for 8 years, and the only way you can win is to put the insurgents on the U.S. military payroll and pay them to stop fighting. And if you're in Afghanistan for 11 years and you can't defeat a few thousand Taliban armed with AK-47s, then your whole reputation as a superpower starts evaporating.
So they've now announced they've beaten al-Qaeda. They're using al-Qaeda in Syria and also in places like Libya, just admitting it. Oh, this is the good al-Qaeda. That's why we stick our hand. Yeah.
They got to have a new enemy, and so it's going to be China.
Oh, yes. And the American people, though, if we're getting out of line, because they're saying we've won the war against al-Qaeda, and as you said, now let's have a war with China. Break that down.
Well, they don't want a real war. They want a Cold War. See, the most profitable conflict was the Cold War with the Soviets, because everybody knew they weren't going to fight it because there wouldn't be anything left. But the Soviet threat was good for 4 or 5 decades of unlimited military spending, of unlimited CIA power. And the war with the hot war in the Middle East, it's not working for them. It hurts their reputation. It demoralizes the troops. Look, the suicides exceed the battle casualties. So they got to have a new Cold War, and the only real person they can pick on now is China. And that's why we had the naval exercises with Philippines a week or so ago. That's why we're building a new naval base in South Korea on an island. That's why we're sending Marines into Asia and Australia. That's why Hillary Clinton declared the South China Sea to be an area of American national interest.
Sure, the Chinese president said 2 months ago, he said, prepare for a war with the United States. Yeah. They're encircling us, but separately, then they pay with a bailout to move the Cadillac and Volt factories over there, and separately let them buy up our infrastructure. I mean, is that part of a double game?
Well, I think it's two different interests. See, the choice of them as an enemy is new. The choice of them as a low-cost source of production is 10, 20 years old, and that benefits manufacturers. But the military security industry needs an enemy. So there is a conflict there between two powerful interest groups in the United States. But they'll keep it a Cold War. They don't really want a hot war with China. I mean, that's not what they want. They want a long-term threat that they can continue to spend unlimited money on airplanes like the F-22, which their pilots are afraid to fly, and which have now been grounded. They don't care. They don't want a real war. They want a long-term Cold War because they can forever hype the Chinese threat as to why they got to have a bigger defense budget and more power. So I think that's where it's moving, and that's why they're kind of shifting the emphasis. Now, the problem with them getting away from the Middle East is Israel, because Israel's still determined that they attack Syria and Iran. And if Israel succeeds in having us attack Syria and Iran, then we may never get out of the Middle East, or we may come heads to head with China and Russia in a hot type of conflict.
Basically, you and I and others, Ron Paul, we're in the way of their madness and the grave the ruling class is trying to dig for themselves. And as you point out, they have Bilderberg meetings and things that come up with general plans and argue with each other. But I see it everywhere where there are different special interests, sometimes even different divisions of the same big companies are at odds with each other. It really is just a bunch of people running in all directions, stealing everything they can.
Right. And also, you see, they now have the country at odds with itself. There's so much hatred of Americans against Americans, and Democrats and Republicans, and right-wing and left-wing, and Christian Zionists and non-Christian Zionists. I mean, it's just an endless... So we are as split among ourselves as the Romans were in their last years. And so a country that internally split, and also now increasingly fearful of their own government, is not a very strong country to be taking on China and Russia. So I think they're headed for a lot of surprises, and I don't know when the dollar goes or when the power of the United States collapses. I don't know when it's going to happen, but nothing that they're doing really furthers our future success. It's all at the expense of our future success.
That's the key. What the globalists, what this group of criminals are doing is wrecking the United States. There's no doubt that their policies are cyanide to this republic. In closing, Dr. Roberts, and of course your great new website, well, it's been out 6 months or so, really nice. A lot of great info there, paulcraigroberts.org, and we carry your fine articles every other day when you write them. Final point. I think it's positive, though, that we're seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 million guns sold a month, and they have questionnaires, and they say, I fear the government. I don't trust them. I don't believe in them anymore. Yeah, I mean, in a way, as long as people know that's the hijacked government, and we offer a good solution, I think that really shows that people have finally woken up. Everybody I talk to, including police, military, you name it, they say that most people they know are finally starting to wake up. Do they know as much as you do or others? No. But they're beginning the process of awakening. Your comments on the gun sales?
Well, you know, I agree with what you said. However, I think an armed population is inconsistent with a police state. So I don't know how long the police state and Homeland Security are going to tolerate an armed population. I just don't know. You know, the only protective amendment left of the Constitution is the Second Amendment. All the others are gone. So how can you have the Second Amendment if you can't have habeas corpus or due process? So and
sir, you know history. That's what happened in the lead-ups in 1765 up to 1775, was they took all the rights an Englishman had, and they said, hey, we're Englishmen. We would have these rights in England. Our Magna Carta, you've taken it here. And the British government, the police, The paramilitary said, we're coming to take your guns, and that's when it started. And I think that's where the day they actually try this is when the Civil War starts.
Well, you know, but we're not organized, Alex. Everybody's atomized. At least when the British came against the colonists, there was organization on the part of the colonists. There's none today. We're not organized. And the efforts some years ago to have a militia, they all failed because they were all infiltrated by federal agents. And so I just don't know if that's right. I mean, it's fine with me if it is, and I can be hopeful, but people, as far as I can tell, are not organized, and a lot of them that are collecting guns are really, they still think there's a Muslim threat, and the Muslims are going to get them, or some other racial entity, or it's not a uniform awareness of where the real threat is.
But it is a reservoir that we can fully awaken. Yeah. And I'll tell you, the military, they're waking up. But I agree with you. We need to really... People generally, though, in a manifesto of liberty, they know who the enemy is. They know who did this. And as the persecution and arrest and disappearances begin, that's where they plan to go. There will be resistance because people won't have a choice. And the enforcers, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about, you know, what would have happened if when the enforcers went out, the secret police to grab people, if folks would have stood up. And I think it's that simple idea of total resistance. Individually, leaderless resistance can't be stopped. And if 1% of 200 million, and that's what it's up to now, gun owners, resist, that's 2 million people. And so all someone else, yeah.
I think the time to be optimistic is when the handful of cops beating up some hapless person are set upon by the large number of bystanders. And the cops are beat up or killed instead of the innocent person. I think when the people start responding to the police with force, they could very easily overcome the police simply because of the disparity in numbers. When that starts happening, then we can say the people really have woken up and really have had enough. Like in Greece, the people were throwing Molotov cocktails at the police. They were trying to kill them.
And they beat them, too. That's yeah.
And so I think...
They haven't been drinking fluoride, Doc. Can you imagine if the government tried to act like this, say, 100 years ago, what would have happened?
It would have been short-lived government, yeah.
Yeah, we've been on a steady diet of...
in the past, but usually they put them down like the Whiskey Rebellion was put down with the army. So, you know, they break all the rules and employ troops against the people when they feel they need to. So, I don't know. It remains to be seen how bad things get. I think you've got to have people quite desperate here before they actually take on the government. And they're not going to get that desperate suddenly. It's going to be a drawn-out process.
Well, a lot of police I talk to are actually getting it now and are criticizing the cases of people like Thomas Kelly, who they torture to death for fun. And I've seen in Latin America, when the police start beating somebody up, everybody runs in and attacks them. But again, they haven't been drinking fluoride, eating GMO, and you know, watching 10 hours of television a day. Thank you so much for talking to us, Dr. Roberts. It's great having you.
Glad to be with you, Alex.
Thank you, sir. We're going to come back and talk to callers for a while, and then coming up later, we got Congressman Jones joining us. 800-259-9231. 800-259-9231. Some calls coming up straight ahead. PrisonPlanet.tv. Don't forget, I'll be on television tonight, 7 o'clock. PrisonPlanet.tv. 15-day free trial right now. Ask yourselves, what are you doing in this time of great challenge? What are you doing to unlock minds?